Hey guys, in this video, we're going to go over 37 actionable FRQ tips and test-taking strategies to help you in AP World History. This is part 2 of 2, so if you haven't watched our prior video on the 5-step strategy to writing effective AP World History FRQs, be sure to first check out that video. This video is going to be a list of tips, so if you find it helpful to pull up a written version of these tips, be sure to click the blog post in the video description to follow along. Without further ado, let's get started. The first tip that we have for you is to make sure that you're being smart about when you're reviewing your textbook for your FRQs. There is so much content covered in AP World History that it is impossible to read every page again and again, so be sure to reference helpful resources that you've made over the course of the year, such as your outlines, your notes from your textbook, and if you didn't take outlines or notes from their textbook, there are tons of AP World History teachers as well as students that have uploaded their notes if you just do a simple Google search for AP World History Unit X notes. These are super helpful for you to provide a baseline for you as you start reviewing for your exam. Our second tip is to make sure that you're prioritizing chronology and periodization over specific dates. Students often make the mistake of emphasizing specific dates to their memory as opposed to understanding the major themes of different time periods. So be sure to understand what's happening before and after each major time period, because that will also help you later on in your DBQ and LEQ to earn the contextualization point. That leads us to tip number 3, which is to focus on the themes of AP World History. Think about how things are interacting with one another. This directly relates back to the ability to discuss and explain when it comes to SAQ questions, which are very, very important because the SAQs often are asking you about things such as continuity and change over time. The fourth tip that we have for you is to make sure that you are remembering the ACE acronym when you're writing your SAQs. The A stands for answer the question, C stands for cite your evidence, and E stands for explaining your evidence and how it connects to your response. The fifth tip is to familiarize yourself with the categories of analysis that you'll be asked in your SAQs. These are most commonly things such as economic questions, demographic, political, cultural, or social questions. So these are commonly assessed not just in the SAQs, but also in the DBQs and LEQs. Tip number 6 is to know your time periods. Readers often emphasize that students make mistakes in periodization by bringing in supporting evidence that is outside of the time period being asked of them. So don't make this mistake. Tip 7 connects back to our prior tip in that students often struggle with periodization when the question asked them from 2 different time periods. This happened as recently as the 2019 exam, and so you need to be prepared for this scenario to talk about both of those time periods. Tip 8 is to be wary of what the College Board calls catchphrases. These are popular terms such as checks and balances or serial murderers. And the reason why you need to be careful here is because it has led students off tangents writing about something that the question is not asking them, such as the death penalty or the criminal justice system. Tip 9 is to make sure that you are practicing how to link your secondary sources to your course content. This is a skill that students struggle mightily with, and it is a vital part of doing well in the SAQs. Tip 10 is to focus a lot of your prep time on the E in the ACE acronym. Students often struggle here because they don't connect the dots as to what they're presenting and how that connects and proves their point. What they'll do instead is they'll simply restate the prompt, or they'll indirectly answer the question without actually showing how it supports causation, comparison, or change in continuity over time. Our final tip when it comes to tackling the SAQs is to make sure that you're using words such as whereas, in contrast to, or likewise when you're drawing comparisons in your SAQs. This is a really easy way to signal for your reader that you understand historical reasoning skills. All right, so we've gone over 11 SAQ tips for AP World History. If you found this helpful so far, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more of this helpful content, and leave a comment in the description as to which tip you found most helpful for the SAQs. Now let's talk about the DBQ. In this section, we're going to go over 22 DBQ tips, which is a lot. So if at any point you need to take a break, just hit the pause button. Let's get started. Our first tip is to make sure that before you start planning your DBQ, that you're double checking the time period. What this means is that if it's saying something about the 20th century, that's anything from 1901 to 2000, or the 18th century, that would be 1701 to 1800. Students, due to test day stress, sometimes confuse time periods and start writing about something that is outside the scope of the time period being asked of them. The second tip is to make sure that you remember that when it comes to your thesis, you only make a point if your thesis is a defensible one. This means that you can't just restate the prompt or reword the prompt and hope to get the point here. The third tip relates to our prior tip, which is when it comes to the thesis, remember the formula, although X, ABC, therefore Y. In this situation, X is going to be your counterpoint or your counterargument, ABC is going to be your supporting evidence, and then therefore Y is going to be your argument. This is a really simple thesis formula to make sure that you always have a thesis that has a clear line of reasoning. Number 4, if you don't like the formula we just shared, another way that you can make sure that you have a very clear thesis is by using the word because or therefore. This will make sure that this is something that can be argued or agreed or disagreed upon. Which leads us to our fifth tip, which is you can always double check if your thesis is a good one based on whether or not it can be agreed or disagreed upon with. Tip 6 is that some AP World History teachers recommend that students put contextualization in their introductory paragraph. That way you don't forget about it later. Tip 7, when it comes to AP World documents, remember the acronym HAPP. This will help you tackle what you need for describing what's happening and how you source them. It stands for historical content, audience, purpose, and then point of view. Tip number 8 is that you only earn 1 point for describing at least 3 documents. So don't spend your entire DBQ describing every document. You won't get any more points for that. Instead, in tip number 9, the second part of that point is to make sure that you can tie the evidence that you're bringing up in your descriptions to support your thesis. This is where the second point comes in when it comes to supporting the documents and evidence section. So remember, if you use 6 documents to support your argument or thesis, you will earn that second point. And also, if you feel unsure about how you interpreted one document, it's always helpful to go ahead and interpret the 7th as backup. Past readers have given this as a tip in order to help you earn that second point. Tip 11, the easiest way to always make sure that you are using the document to support your thesis is to remember the word therefore. What this means is that you can use sentence structures such as XYZ, therefore ABC. XYZ would be where you describe the document, and then ABC is going to be where you tie the document and what you're described to your thesis to support and advance your argument. Tip 12, remember that in order to earn your contextualization point for outside evidence, you need to bring in something that is relevant to your thesis as well as from the same time period. Sometimes students make the mistake of providing something of outside evidence, but it's outside of the time period being asked of them. Speaking of that, tip 13 is that the easiest way to earn that contextualization point is to describe what happened in AP World History in the time period immediately before the time period that you're being assessed on. Tip 14, make sure that you build the habit of grouping your documents. It's really nice when students are able to group them into 2 or 3 categories in their responses because it demonstrates higher order thinking versus an approach in which the student is just saying, in document 1, XYZ, in document 2, XYZ, and so on. It demonstrates the student's ability to create a coherent argument that draws from multiple sources. Building on that tip, remember to refer to the authors of the documents and not just the document number. This will help you keep that HAPP acronym in mind when you're thinking about that historical content, audience, or point of view. Tip 16, make sure that your DBQ supporting paragraphs have topic sentences. This will allow you to build a comprehensive argument instead of just jumping your reader from one data point to the next data point of support. The next tip is to remember that when you're trying to earn your sourcing point, that you ask yourself, who is this document written for? What's the intent of this author? What might this document have accomplished? Why did the author say this in this certain way? And this will allow you to always be thinking about how what you're bringing up connects back to your thesis. Remember, in order to earn the sourcing point, you need to do so for at least 3 documents. We recommend doing more than 3 just to be safe. 3 more tips. Tip number 19 is to not ask for additional documents. This is an old tip that AP World History teachers have continued to share with their students over time, and it is an outdated tip. As recently as 2018, 15 to 20% of student responses asked for additional documents when that is not necessary for today's DBQs. Tip 20 is related to the complexity point. The easiest way to score your complexity point is to always do the opposite historical thinking skill than what you're being asked. What do we mean by that? Well, if you're being asked, for example, to talk about change over time, you're going to want to discuss continuity over time in your complexity instance. The College Board describes this as explaining relevant and insightful connections within and across periods. Or, for example, if you're being asked to write about comparison, you're going to want to talk about contrast. The College Board describes this as explaining both similarity and difference. And if you're being asked to talk about causation, then you might want to discuss the effects in your complexity instance. And finally, another way to earn the complexity point is to go ahead and try to apply your argument to another time period and draw a connection. If you do this, keep in mind that you have to apply your entire document to the other time period. Building on tip 20, tip 21 is to remember that when you are earning the complexity point, you have to remember that it needs to be integrated into your entire argument and not just a brief phrase or reference. The College Board is looking for you to explain why you're including something in your response. And our last tip for the DBQs is a helpful way to cue your reader into the fact that you're trying complexity. And that's to use words such as another time or another way or another view. This essentially cues your reader in that you're trying to draw in that opposing historical thinking skill than what's being asked of you in the prompt. All right, so we've covered a ton of DBQ tips. Now we've got a couple LEQ tips, so let's go ahead and review those. By the way, as I mentioned at the end of the SAQ section, if you found this video helpful so far, leave a comment as to which tip you found most helpful because we'd like to hear from you. And also, it helps other students find this video. The last 4 tips that we have are related to the LEQ section, and our first one is to remember that you have to be comfortable with all the types of the LEQs. Again, these are the core historical skills such as causation, comparison, and change in continuity over time. Our second tip is to remember that just like the DBQ, you have to understand where your points are coming from in the LEQ. A lot of the points are very similar to the DBQ. For example, you're going to earn a point for having a clear, historically defensible thesis or a claim that has a clear line of reasoning. You're also going to earn points for contextualization. So remember that tip earlier that we gave in the DBQ section in terms of providing that early on in your response. When it comes to doing this, what we recommend to do in AP World History is to mention something that happened 2 to 5 decades or 20 to 50 years before the time period that you're writing about. Finally, remember that there are 2 points for analysis. The first one is for answering the historical thinking skill that's been asked of you in the prompt. Again, this is always going to be something related to comparing, evaluating causation, or exploring change and continuity over time. And the second one is for having that complexity that we talked about with the DBQs. Tip 3 is to remember that when it comes to writing your LEQ practice, go ahead and write your sample response. Then set aside a dedicated time period for you to use your class notes and provide additional specific evidence that you could have used at that time when you were practicing your LEQs. This will help build your habit of making sure that all the evidence that you have is very specific and helpful to your reader. Lastly, when it comes to familiarizing yourself with how to write for the contextualization point, the easiest way to do so is to look at the last 5 years worth of past exam responses and see how sample responses were graded. This will tell you what did and did not earn the point. 3 more resources for you to check out as you start to prep for your AP World exam. The first one is AP Central, which has those past FRQs, as well as scoring guidelines, chief reader reports, and sample student responses. The next one is Albert's AP World History Review Guide. This is a 100% free resource on our blog that will give you helpful pacing in terms of your study prep. And then the last thing is Albert's AP World History course. This provides hundreds of practice questions with detailed explanations, as well as original FRQs to stack on top of your AP Central FRQs to give yourself an edge ahead of your classmates and ahead of your peers so that you can better learn by doing. If you found this helpful, leave a comment for us telling us what specifically you found helpful. We'd love to hear from you. And like we mentioned before, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for other helpful test-taking tips. And if you haven't already caught our first video on the 5 steps for writing effective AP World History FRQs, be sure to check that out. Other than that, that's it for this time. I'll see you next time.